The floorboards creaked a welcome. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. Maya smiled, her new apartment, old but full of charm. Cheap rent for a piece of history. She explored each room, high ceilings, stained glass windows. Then the bedroom. An ornate wooden door carved with strange symbols stood opposite her bed. Locked. Storage, the landlord had said, his voice gruff. Off limits. Maya shrugged. Plenty of space without it. She unpacked her things, the city sounds humming outside. Her life finally starting. The first night, Maya woke to a scratching sound, faint from behind the locked door. Mice, probably. The building was old. The scratching came again the next night, louder, more insistent, no longer the sound of tiny claws. This was something rhythmic, deliberate, almost like tapping. Days turned into a week. The scratching continued, always at night, always behind the locked door. Maya's curiosity gnawed at her. What was in there? Cleaning one afternoon, Maya found it, a key, hidden under the loose floorboard beneath the kitchen sink, tarnished silver, intricately carved. It wouldn't fit any other lock in the apartment. The wooden door whispered in her mind. She stood before it, key trembling in her hand. The landlord's warning echoed, off limits. But the scratching beckoned. Curiosity overwhelmed caution. The lock clicked open. The room was small, dusty. A single window boarded up. A heavy desk sat against the far wall. On it, a leather-bound diary and a dried, dark stain, like old blood. The diary's pages were brittle, the writing faded ink on yellowed paper. It belonged to a woman named Alina, a previous tenant. Alina wrote of strange noises, of feeling watched, of an invisible guest urging her to do terrible things. The entries grew more frantic, the handwriting wilder. The last entry simply read, "He says I can't leave. He says I belong to him now." A cold whisper brushed Maya's ear. He lied. She whirled around. The room was empty, except for a small tarnished mirror on the desk beside the diary. A face flickered in its depths, pale, haunting, eyes filled with a terrible sadness, and a flicker of malicious glee. The face was hers, but not hers. Twisted, wrong. Panic seized Maya. She had to get out, now. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air thick with an unspoken dread. Every shadow in the room felt like it was watching her, waiting for her next move. She ran to the bedroom door, the one she'd entered through. Rattled the handle, locked. The door, once a simple barrier, now felt like an insurmountable obstacle. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud and frantic, echoing in her ears. She threw her weight against it, solid, immovable. Desperation clawed at her insides as she pounded on the door, hoping against hope that it would give way. But it stood firm, mocking her efforts. Her phone, she fumbled for it, no signal. The screen flickered, casting eerie shadows on her face. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The one lifeline she had, and it was useless. She tried to call for help, but the only sound was static. The static seemed to grow louder, filling the room with its oppressive noise. It was as if the very air around her was conspiring to keep her trapped. Then a voice whispering through the phone's speaker, "You're just like her." The word sent a chill down her spine. Who was her? And why was she being compared to this unknown person? The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the static, but its message was clear and haunting. Her phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "He doesn't like it when you try to leave." The message was like a punch to the gut. Who was he? And how did they know she was trying to escape? The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows darker. She felt a presence, unseen but palpable, watching her every move. Maya's eyes darted around the room, searching for any possible escape route. The windows were barred, the walls solid. She felt like a caged animal, every instinct screaming at her to find a way out, but there was none. Determination set in. She couldn't give up, not now. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. There had to be a way, she just had to find it. She began searching through drawers and cabinets, hoping to find something, anything that could help her. Each drawer she opened was empty, each cabinet bare. It was as if the room had been meticulously prepared to keep her trapped. Then in the last drawer, she found an old key. It was rusty and looked like it hadn't been used in years. But it was something, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. She rushed to the door, her hands trembling as she tried the key. It fit. She turned it slowly, holding her breath. The lock clicked open. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. The door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway. It was silent, too silent. She stepped out cautiously, every nerve on edge. The hallway stretched out before her, long and foreboding. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Each step felt like it took an eternity. She could feel eyes on her, though she saw no one. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. At the end of the hallway, she reached another door. Her hand hesitated on the handle. What if this one was locked too? She couldn't bear the thought, but she had to try. She turned the handle and pushed the door open. A bright light flooded the hallway, blinding her for a moment. She stepped through, hoping that this was her way out. As she stepped into the light, she felt a strange sense of calm. The fear that had gripped her moments ago seemed to dissipate. She didn't know what awaited her on the other side, but she knew she had to keep moving forward. She glanced back at the dark hallway one last time. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been minutes. She took a deep breath and stepped fully into the light, ready to face whatever came next. Footsteps outside, heavy, slow, approaching her apartment door. Each step echoed ominously through the dimly lit corridor, sending shivers down her spine. The sound was almost hypnotic, a rhythmic reminder of the inevitable confrontation that awaited her. She could feel the vibrations through the floorboards, each one a harbinger of the dread that was about to unfold. The landlord. He stood at the threshold, a smirk playing on his lips. His eyes glinted with a malevolent glee, as if he relished the fear he instilled in his tenants. The smirk was not just a simple expression, it was a mask that barely concealed the darkness within. His presence was suffocating, filling the small space with an air of menace that was almost tangible. He looked exactly like the man in the photograph Alina kept with her diary. The photograph was old, its edges frayed and yellowed with age, but the face was unmistakable. It was a face that had haunted her dreams, a face that seemed to transcend time. The eyes in the photograph were the same eyes that now bore into her, cold and unfeeling. The same man who had smiled out from the faded newspaper clipping detailing his disappearance. The article was a relic from a bygone era, its ink faded but its story still chilling. It spoke of a man who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and broken lives. And now, here he was, standing before her as if he had stepped out of the pages of history. "You shouldn't have seen that," the landlord said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was an undercurrent of threat that was impossible to ignore. It was as if he was stating a simple fact, a truth that was as immutable as the laws of nature. His eyes never left hers, and she felt as if he could see into the very depths of her soul. His voice was a dry rasp, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was a sound that seemed to come from another world, a world where light and hope had long since been extinguished. The rasping quality of his voice added an extra layer of menace, making her feel as if she was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. "Who are you?" Maya's voice shook. She tried to muster some semblance of courage, but it was a futile effort. The words came out as a whisper, barely audible over the pounding of her heart. She felt as if she was standing on the edge of an abyss, one wrong move away from plunging into darkness. This building, it needs sustenance, fear, despair. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was as if the building itself was a living entity, feeding off the emotions of its inhabitants. The walls seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing longer and more oppressive. She could almost hear the building's hunger, a low, insistent growl that reverberated through the halls. This door, it traps them, in their worst memories, their darkest fears. He stepped closer. The door was an ornate piece of craftsmanship, its intricate designs belying the horrors it concealed. It was a portal to a world of nightmares, a place where the past and present collided in a maelstrom of terror. As he stepped closer, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the door was a gateway to her own personal hell. "And you, Maya, you are just the feast he craves." His words were a chilling reminder of her own vulnerability. She was not just a tenant, she was prey, a source of sustenance for the malevolent force that inhabited the building. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and disoriented. She could see the hunger in his eyes, a hunger that would not be sated until she was consumed by the darkness. Maya took a step back, her mind racing. She had to find a way out, but every exit seemed to lead deeper into the labyrinth of fear that the building had become. Her thoughts were a chaotic jumble, each one more desperate than the last. She could feel the walls closing in, the air growing thicker with each passing second. She remembered happier times when the apartment was a place of warmth and laughter. Those memories seemed like a distant dream now, overshadowed by the creeping darkness that had taken hold. She clung to those memories, using them as a lifeline to keep her grounded in reality. Desperation fueled her actions as she searched for an escape. She tried the windows, but they were sealed shut, as if the building itself was conspiring to keep her trapped. She could feel the landlord's eyes on her, watching her every move with a predatory intensity. In her frantic search, she stumbled upon a hidden door, a secret passage that she had never noticed before. It was a small, unassuming door, almost hidden in the shadows. She hesitated for a moment, fear and hope warring within her. This could be her way out, or it could be another trap. With a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped into the passageway. It was dark, and narrow, the air thick with the scent of decay. She could barely see a few feet ahead, but she pressed on, driven by the need to escape. Each step was a struggle, the darkness pressing in on her from all sides. When she finally emerged, she found herself in a different part of the building. It was a place she'd never seen before, a labyrinthine maze of corridors and rooms that seemed to stretch on forever. She looked around in confusion, trying to get her bearings. The building seemed to shift and change around her, as if it was alive and aware of her presence. She heard footsteps behind her and turned around in fear. The landlord was there, his smirk wider than ever. He had followed her, and now there was no escape. She was trapped in the heart of the building, surrounded by its malevolent presence. The realization was a crushing weight, and she felt her hope slipping away. The landlord's eyes were filled with malice as he reached out towards her. His touch was cold, sending a jolt of fear through her body. She tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. She could feel the darkness closing in, the building's hunger growing stronger with each passing moment. Maya struggled to break free, but the landlord's grip tightened. She could feel her strength waning, the fight draining out of her. Her vision blurred, and she could hear the building's low growl, a sound that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. She was losing, and she knew it. In a final, desperate attempt, she summoned all her remaining strength and tried to wrench herself free, but it was no use. The landlord's smirk widened, and the darkness closed in, swallowing her whole. The building had claimed another victim, and its hunger was sated for now. He lunged. In that instant, Maya saw it. The tarnished mirror from Alina's room. It was as if time slowed down, the air thick with tension. The mirror, once a symbol of beauty and elegance, now stood as a relic of a forgotten past, its surface marred by years of neglect and secrets untold. A glimmer of reflected light in the landlord's eyes. It was not just any light, it was a spark of something ancient, something powerful. Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she locked eyes with him. The light seemed to dance, almost mocking her, daring her to make a move, a connection. She grabbed the mirror, hurling it at the wall just as the landlord reached her. The weight of the mirror in her hands felt like the weight of her own fears and doubts. As it left her grip, she felt a strange sense of liberation, as if she was casting away not just the mirror, but the chains that had bound her for so long. The mirror shattered, glass spraying across the floor. Each shard seemed to carry a piece of the past, a fragment of a story long forgotten. The sound of the breaking glass was deafening, echoing through the room like a cry for help. It was as if the mirror was releasing all the pain and sorrow it had absorbed over the years. The landlord screamed, a horrifying guttural sound. It was a scream that spoke of agony, of loss, of something deeply personal. Maya could feel the raw emotion in his voice, a mixture of anger and despair. It was a sound that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The room wavered, the walls dissolving into swirling shadows. The boundaries between reality and illusion began to blur, creating a surreal landscape that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The shadows danced and twisted, forming shapes that were both familiar and alien. It was as if the room itself was alive, reacting to the events unfolding within it. The landlord crumpled, his form flickering, fading. His body seemed to lose its solidity, becoming a mere shadow of its former self. Maya watched in a mixture of horror and fascination as he flickered like a dying flame, his essence slowly dissipating into the air. It was a sight both tragic and mesmerizing, a reminder of the fragility of existence. "No, my face, you can't." His voice was filled with desperation, a plea for something that could never be reclaimed. The words hung in the air, heavy with regret and sorrow. It was a cry for help, a final attempt to hold on to something that was slipping away. His voice was a fading whisper. Then, silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Maya stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, trying to make sense of the chaos around her. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony that had filled the room moments before. It was a silence that spoke of endings and new beginnings, of shattered reflections and broken illusions. The room was gone. Maya stood in the hallway of her building, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. The ornate wooden door stood ajar, empty, silent. She fled. Days later, in a new apartment, Maya tried to forget the terror, the whispers, the face in the mirror. Her phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. "You forgot something." Below the message, a picture. A tarnished silver key.